Hello, scaredy cats. Welcome back to Jump Scare, the weekly show where I bring you into the frightening world of horror. I'm your host, Cierra, and I'm here with Garrett Graham, fellow horror enthusiast and owner of the coolest horror t-shirts I have ever seen. I would see you when we would go to conventions, you're wearing like a new horror shirt, like Reanimator.
Should have bought one today.
I know, right? But you have to dress up because you have your new film, Don't Frack with Denton, is out, so go see that.
I have to pretend to be a respectable, upright, upstanding citizen.
But how did you first get into horror films?
Well, I mean, I've liked horror films for about as long as I can remember, but you know, a lot of it, actually, one thing that really got me to appreciate horror a lot more than I did, or really to appreciate why I liked horror so much, was actually taking a class at the University of North Texas. Shameless plug, the coolest class that I ever took at the University of North Texas was Harry Benshoff, Professor Harry Benshoff's Gender and Sexuality in the Horror Film. And what I really loved about that class was that, you know, you get to geek out about horror movies the whole time, and Harry's a great teacher. But one of the things that I really loved about that class, and he does it with all of his classes, is it's ostensibly about movies, but he uses it as this kind of scaffolding, this kind of jumping off point to talk about real social issues. And so while we're talking about horror films, and we're talking about slashers and body horror and Cronenberg, but we're really talking about, you know, the history of people's complicated relationships to what they're afraid of. And even though I like horror, there's also some genres of horror that I don't like as much. And there are some aspects of horror that, you know, I'm not as reticent to put on a t-shirt because the horror genre, you know, it can at times be very reactionary.
Oh, yes.
And it can at times be, you know, really not the best reflection of our nature. But at other times, horror films can really be an important tool to help us deconstruct what we're afraid of personally or also societally, and hopefully kind of deconstruct that fear and bring people to a better place of understanding. Some horror films just want you to murder women and get your way and are kind of just mean adventures that I don't particularly like.
Yeah.
And then some horror movies really make you think and really kind of put you into an uncomfortable but sometimes enlightening relationship with your fears.
Yes. I think I also took...
I got an A in that class.
Heck yeah. Yeah, I also took Gender and Sexuality in Horror by Harry Benshoff, and without that class, this show would probably not exist. Because that class actually really did inspire me and showed me a different perspective on horror. And of course, the books were incredible. He actually wrote a book called Monsters in the Closet, which, amazing title, by the way, and just an amazing tool. Also, Monster Show by David J. Scull is another great tool, and I talk about it constantly on Jump Scare as an amazing tool for research. Anytime I do any show, any episode, I always go to that book because it is incredible and gives me all the history and why certain films may be important to the culture of that time in different eras, and it's amazing.
Yeah, he's also really good at pointing out that, you know, obviously we don't all come to horror films in the same way, and we're not all the same people. And that's something that's really important to remember, and something that Benshoff's always really good about pointing out is that, you know, the kinds of people that like the kinds of horror films that maybe I don't like are usually the ones that are the quickest to point out that, you know, your reaction to this horror movie is less than identical to mine, therefore one of us has to be wrong and one of us has to be full of crap, which is of course, you know, nonsense, because everybody comes at every film from their own kind of personal position and their own body and their own history, and what that means is that, you know, we think that these films exist up there on the shelf, and they just have their meaning self-contained, and we can just pull them out and look at them. But the truth is that the film's new every time you watch it. There's a collision between yourself and all of your personal context and everything that they put into the film. And I had this real, this is not, you know, I'm not making this up, I had this real sort of whoa moment in one of Benshoff's classes where I realized that every single film that I had ever watched and every single film that's ever been made is in a constant state of flux in terms of what it means for any individual person at any time, which means every single film in existence is a living document. And whoa.
Yeah, it's incredible. That's
why you gotta show up to class.
Yes, if you have that class, show up on time. And plus, the films that he chooses he has a purpose for every film that he chooses. And some of these films that I saw, I haven't even heard of at the time, and seeing them definitely opened my eyes and helped me kind of figure out what types of horror films that I like, because he showed such a vast, variation of films and different genres and subgenres and
even silent films.
And even silent films. No, I remember watching was it Peeping Tom for the first time and being like, whoa, like I didn't know this existed.
I also had not seen that movie.
Yeah, and we were talking about how it was a huge predecessor to the slasher, and of course I know like Psycho and a lot of films that are more mainstream get a lot of that credit, but we also forget about the smaller films that also helped push, the genres that we know today, whether it be slasher, whether it be body horror, and it's good to it's always interesting to brush up on that information and learn like how these genres were ultimately made and created, which is awesome.
And everything draws from something else. They say that there's nothing new under the sun, and everything that purports to be the first time this thing has ever happened, more often than not, if you dig deep, which I imagine is what Jump Scare is all about, there's always more behind the scenes, and there's always more currents of influence that are just fascinating to uncover, and that's why I love studying films and horror. It's why I liked that class.
Yeah, for me, every time I create a episode of Jump Scare, I'll find a specific topic or film that I want to cover, and I'm amazed that there are just tons of information I'm just finding out for myself for the first time, and I love sharing it with you guys, obviously. So I think the one misunderstanding about horror is that it's just blood and guts, and of course my favorite thing is that it is reactionary, and it really is, because I wrote a post about Cannibal Holocaust on Famous Monsters because it was the anniversary of the film ever coming out, and the comments were so strong. Like, people had a very strong opinion about the film, whether it be negative, whether it be positive. And I actually had to go back into the post and actually fix it to be like, I do not condone certain things in this film, but it's the anniversary. Why would I not talk about this really important film in history that really changed a lot of what was happening in horror?
Well, it's important because of the controversy.
Exactly.
People went to jail over that film,
yes.
Perhaps unjustly. And again, if you plan on watching Cannibal Holocaust anytime soon, don't eat for at least a few hours beforehand, and you will see animals murdered. You don't see any actual people get murdered.
No, none of the people actually get murdered.
But it's a very controversial film. But, films like that, force us to ask these questions about what we do and don't put on film. Questions that don't necessarily get asked in your average rom-com.
Yeah. And it definitely changed the landscape of like Mondo film and exploitation film as well, and then eventually just horror in general. I don't know. For me, I think it's really fascinating to see how it's changed through the years. Well, thank you, Garrett, for coming on to the show. And don't forget to check out part 2 of this awesome interview with Garrett Graham. And I hope you enjoyed part 1. And guess what, guys? Stay spooky.